So we have officially witnessed the end of the Sassanids as they gambled that final battle we saw last time. So now the Muslims basically are kind of just, I wouldn't say done with them, obviously there's going to be some resistance, but for the most part the Sassanids are done. Like, I guess we're going to focus more on Rome, because they're still kind of fighting, they're still existing, you know, but we'll see, we'll see.
In late 643, shortly after Ammar returned from his expedition against the so-called Pentapolis, the Egyptian governor travelled back to Medina in order to meet with Umar, with whom he already had a somewhat tense relationship.
Oh boy, this is kind of what I've been waiting for, the meeting between these two personalities. Between everything Ammar has done, between, you know, kind of disregarding Umar's earlier order and going to Egypt, constantly asking for help, just like there's probably a lot of tension, I'd imagine. So I'm like wondering what the heck's gonna go on here.
Mistrusted by the Caliph, Ammar received a frosty reception from the very start. The tension between the two men wasn't helped by the fact that Umar, who always kept a close eye on his governors via an internal spy network, suspected Ammar of unjustly appropriating Egypt's wealth. So, when the latter returned to his province, the Caliph dispatched a trusted inspector, Muhammad bin Maslama, to appraise Ammar's assets. The latter produced an account of his assets, and he was found guilty of taking too much. The excess was confiscated and taken back to Medina. That wasn't the end of the Caliph's incessant prodding. A short while thereafter, unsatisfied at the lackluster revenues flowing into the treasury from Egypt, Umar had a heated debate with Ammar by letter. After that ended in a deadlock, a Copt was sent to Medina to inform the Caliph of his province's financial situation. He bluntly informed Umar that previous rulers of Egypt had seen to the land's prosperity before taking anything from it, while Muslim governors only extracted. In response, Umar carved Egypt into two separate administrative districts during late 644.
Like I said, I really find Ammar interesting and kind of entertaining. And again, like I said, these two, like, I'm amazed that Umar hasn't tried to do more against Ammar. I mean, the dude freaking got rid of Khalid, and Khalid was the most loyal, pure-hearted man in the world, so like, he's putting up a lot with Ammar, I feel, which I'm kind of surprised. I thought he would have, like, done something more drastic by now, but again, these personalities, and Ammar is, like, very rebellious, I feel, at least in a sense that he's not afraid to kind of, like, you know, upset his superior. So I find him entertaining and all the drama he's adding, though I am surprised Umar's putting up with a lot of it, you know. And yeah, about this whole wealth stuff, like, from what I'm getting, Ammar is just taking wealth, probably more for himself than, I guess, is, you know, okay. At least by whatever metric the Umar and the Muslims have set up, and apparently the Egyptians think they're just taking, so I'm getting the impression, at least in terms of like wealth, Ammar's not running things well, and so might make a better conqueror than an administrator. Again, that's just the clues I'm getting. For all I know, he's doing great in everything else, but yeah, overall, just, I wonder how this is gonna end. Do you think, I wonder if Umar's ever gonna just straight up remove Ammar, or do something even more drastic against him. Like, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I feel like there's a lot of, I'm so invested in the interaction between these two, because they're like butting heads, and I find that just so interesting.
Giving Ammar Lower Egypt to govern from Fustat, while Upper Egypt would be ruled from Fayum by Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sa', the foster brother of Uthman. Predictably, Amr was, once again, infuriated at this deliberate diminishing of his authority. Back in Medina, a deadly plot had formed, centering around Hormuzan, who had converted to Islam and used his vast experience in Sassanid administration and governance to become one of Umar's key advisors.
Wow. Dang, he moved quick.
This, the Persian noble never forgot the injury done to his home. It seems that Hormuzan made contact with Firuz, a Sassanid soldier who was enslaved after Qadisiyah or Nahavand and brought to the Caliphate's capital, and in November of 644, Firuz knifed Umar. Before passing away 3 days after, the second caliph appointed a shura.
Holy crap, whoa, whoa, whoa.
And in November of 644, Firuz knifed.
Okay. Firuz. Okay, whoa. I'm sorry, I got caught off guard. I wasn't expecting Umar to go out like that. Okay. Hormuzan, you know, after being defeated and converting, basically worked his way right next to the caliphate. Good on him. Holy crap, that's impressive. But managed to get him assassinated.
And in November of 644, Firuz...
Okay, Firuz stabbed Umar during the dawn prayer and then committed suicide. Hormuzan, however, was later killed by Umar's son, Ubadallah. Wow.
Knifed Umar. Before passing away 3 days after, the second caliph appointed a shura.
The shura council was held while Umar was still alive and appointed 6 men to elect the next caliph. Alright.
Or council of 6 men, to appoint his successor from among their ranks. After deep debate, they decided that Uthman would become the third Rashidun Caliph. It is worth noting that while Sunni Islam views Uthman as one of the rightly guided caliphs, Shia Muslims believe this election should not have occurred at all, and Ali was to be the next in line. Shortly after,
Okay, let me get that again. That was interesting. We know Ali, he was brought up, like, I think last video or the video before, in giving sound advice in dealing with the Sassanids.
Muslims believe this election was a third Rashidun Caliph. Debate. They decided that Uthman would become the third Rashidun Caliph. It is worth noting that while Sunni Islam views Uthman as one of the rightly guided caliphs, Shia Muslims believe this election should not have occurred at all, and Ali was to be the next in line.
I see some division in opinion right there. That's interesting.
Shortly after, Amr ibn al-As visited Uthman in order to lobby for his Upper Egyptian colleague's removal. The new caliph refused outright, prompting him to declare that he wouldn't return to Egypt until Abdullah ibn Sa'd was removed. In response to this threat, Uthman appointed his foster brother governor of all Egypt, further deepening the dispute between the two men.
Dude, what is Ammar gonna do? I'm kind of afraid of Ammar right now. If he's gonna... I don't know why. The thought in my head is someone's gonna kill someone. I feel. I don't know who or what. But, like, I feel like someone's... Or either that someone's gonna have to get completely removed. I mean, Ammar just lost Egypt, so... Yeah, that's... Ugh.
Shortly after, Amr ibn al-As visited Uthman in order to lobby for his Upper Egyptian colleague's removal. The new caliph refused outright, prompting him to declare that he wouldn't return to Egypt until Abdullah ibn Sa'd was removed. In response to this threat, Uthman appointed his foster brother governor of all Egypt, further deepening the dispute.
Yeah, Ammar is kind of starting to act up, though, I will say. So... he's a dangerous person, I feel, in terms of his commandship, man. Just, like, already a proven commander, but, like, someone who ain't afraid to step up to the caliph. So, I don't know, man, like, Amor, like, I enjoy learning about him, but I feel like right now I don't know if he's about to do something like really drastic, or someone's gonna have to make a move, right? At least that's what I'm guessing. Could be wrong.
Between the two men. The Romans in Egypt were not happy with Amr's policies, but Abdullah's attempts to increase the incomes from the province were even less popular. Alexander
Okay, under Abdullah, the situation in Egypt worsened as his high taxation. It's always taxation, guys, that starts crap. Policy made the Egyptians rebel against the caliphate.
Alexandria in particular bore the brunt of this new lust for revenue, leading its notoriously riotous population to undertake drastic measures. A group of prominent Romans dispatched messages to the new emperor, Constans II. These letters outlined the outrages of Muslim rule and its jizya tax, but also pointed out that Abdullah had let the Nile realm's defense slip into a pitiful state, and the city was only garrisoned by a paltry 1,000 men and could be easily taken. Perceiving an opportunity to regain control of Egypt and remedy the wound which its loss had dealt to his empire and his pride, Constans began secretly amassing a great strike force of 300 ships and many thousands of soldiers, command of which he bestowed on a eunuch known as Manuel. Constance's fleet was ready after almost a year. Because the reduced
Yeah, I will say though, this is the first time in the series we're starting to see cracks form within the Muslims. Like before, they were a united front, going off, winning. But what did they say? Conquering is one thing, but governing is another. You know, or like conquering is easy, governing is hard. And now that we're kind of slowed down on the conquering aspect, I mean, there's still more to come, obviously, but like now that that's sort of slowed down, at least for now, it seems like, at least in just Egypt, like I don't know about all the other areas, everything else so far seems fine, but maybe because Kings and Generals hasn't covered everything else, but at least in Egypt, like, so far the governing has not gone well, so like, and you're starting to see like disputes, like straight up a caliph was assassinated, like that's gonna be the first, right? And then you see this dispute between a high, like a commander like Amar and Uthman, and it's like, I feel like you're starting to see some internal things, which is common with all kingdoms and all empires, etc., but like it's starting to now apply to this new young you know, Muslim world, which is just cool to see, like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Byzantine Empire was still the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, the Caliphate having not yet developed any seaborne capacity. There was nothing to stop this fleet from unexpectedly sailing straight into the harbour at Alexandria in early 646. As the Roman sympathizers predicted, the 1,000-strong Muslim garrison was no adequate defense against this shock assault from the sea. When Roman forces landed almost unopposed, Alexandria's population simultaneously rose up against the occupying Arabs. Most of the city's garrison was slain in the brief clash that followed. However, while the invasion army began ravaging the vicinity around Alexandria, some of the Muslims that escaped traveled to Fustat and informed the governor what was happening.
Okay, so the Romans have already made due to the eternal strife that's starting to now affect the Muslims and the laxing of the defense, the Romans already have a foothold back in Egypt, and in Alexandria no less, probably the most renowned of the cities, at least around here. So that's already like capitalizing on the enemy not fully like being prepared and kind of dealing with their own stuff. So I will say that's already a good start, but like once they get their act together and start fighting, I don't know how the Romans plan on taking all of Egypt back. I feel like that's quite a lofty goal. And so far they haven't been able to defeat the Muslims in a pitched battle. So again, if the Muslims just, you know, get back on track right now. It's like, this is probably a very short-lived, you know, adventure, right?
Abdullah ibn Sa'd didn't even have a chance to react. Lacking confidence in their new viceroy's martial ability, the Muslims of Egypt sent a delegation to Caliph Uthman, urging him to send Amr back so that he could put an end to the crisis.
And Amor right now is beyond angry because he just got removed now, but he's the man who's needed, right? So, gotta put aside some personal pride or strife for the best, for the Muslims, right?
Understanding that Amr was both a man of formidable military talent and feared by the Romans, Uthman bit his tongue and asked Amr to take his post back.
Swallowing the pride. But it's true though, like, Amor's basically been the man so far in Egypt, so like, if anyone can fix the situation, it's him, so he got his way. Amor, man, like I said, I find him so entertaining. I really like him as a character, you know?
Wasting no time, the man who had conquered the Romans once before travelled to Fustat as quickly as possible with the aim of emulating his previous achievement. Upon his arrival, the morale of Islam's warriors was boosted significantly, and they prepared for war eagerly, while Amr started planning. Informed by spies and agents that the Romans were advancing leisurely from Alexandria to Fustat, many of Amr's brash officers pressed for their commander to attack and confine the enemy to the treacherous Mediterranean metropolis before all Egypt revolted against the Muslim regime. Amr did not agree with this appraisal, as he believed that this advance would stretch Roman supply and communication lines to the limit. Manuel and his army marched under the close observation of Amr's informants, who constantly reported the Romans' position and strength. The land forces made their way up the eastern bank of the Nile, accompanied by a large flotilla of supporting warships sailing parallel to them on the river itself. Byzantine indiscipline began causing problems almost immediately. Roman soldiers moved from town to town, and the population was not happy with their behavior. When Manuel neared the halfway point between
with 19 hotel breaks,
Alexandria and Fustat, Amr began a countermarch with 15,000 warriors of his own, moving on a direct collision course with the Romans. Both armies finally came into contact with one another near a large town known as Nikiou or Nakios. After resting for the night in their respective camps, the Romans and Muslims deployed on the cultivated, featureless and flat terrain just south of Nikiou. Amr's left, a cavalry regiment under the command of Sharik bin Sumay, rested on the Nile River, as did the Roman right. In addition to their organization in neat formations, a large number of Roman archers also embarked on the riverine ships.
You know, it is impressive, like I said, maybe not impressive, but point is that it has been mentioned a bit in this series that the Romans have naval superiority. So it's interesting to now see it, at least them trying to utilize that advantage here. And it seems like they're going to try something different, maybe attacks from the ships themselves, which would kind of be incredibly useful, assuming that the Muslims couldn't get to them. So that would be an incredibly interesting and different approach, and a new challenge for Amr to overcome.
Once his preparations for battle were complete, Manuel ordered the Byzantine ground forces into effective bow range before coming to a halt and unleashing a destructive barrage of arrows against the Muslim position. On the river, Manuel had prepared a clever stratagem. His ships continued sailing until they passed by Amr's flank, at which point their onboard archers struck the Muslims in the flank as well.
Like I said, this is a unique strategy. Yeah, it's different, it's unique, it utilizes an advantage that the Romans have that the Muslims lack, which is boats. Overall, yeah. Yeah, overall, just a cool new little strategy that Manuel is implementing.
Amma's men had already been struggling to deal with the frontal volley, and so suffered terribly from the multi-directional bombardment. Samé's regiment in particular was almost totally decimated, having been positioned closest to the river, but even Amma had a horse shot out from under him. Despite this punishment, however, the Muslims were unwilling to surrender the battlefield, and so endured the storm with considerable tenacity.
I ordered 200 hand-forged knives.
Once Manuel believed that his enemy was sufficiently weakened, he called back the flanking vessels and had their onboard troops fall into ranks behind the main army, and then began yet another arrow attack against the Muslim line. The moment after the Byzantine eunuch general ordered a halt to his preliminary barrage, he directed his infantry to advance into spear and sword range. Although early Muslim armies were generally portrayed as being most comfortable in this kind of close quarters engagement, the Roman soldiers nevertheless impacted Amma's battered host with considerable ferocity, cracking their already faltering line. Samé's regiment, which had endured the brunt of Manuel's sea-borne missile attack, actually did break and run. Amma hastily pulled the remainder of his men away from the Romans' attack and halted only a short distance away in order to regroup as best he could. However, Manuel, believing that the Muslims were already beaten, did not advance and finish his enemy off, instead simply waiting where he was. After a brief, eerie pause in the fighting, a magnificently dressed Roman champion, clad in gold-studded armor, rode out into the open space between the two armies and challenged the Muslims to single combat.
So Manuel has frickin' Ammar on the ropes. Like, this is actually the most I've seen Ammar struggle, which is already Manuel has shown he's shown a pretty good strong opening, but now every time a duel happens, the Muslims win. I don't think this is a good idea.
This would give the latter time to take a breath, reform, and reorganize. So, one of Amma's favoured Mubarizan, an Arab known as Hormal, accepted the Roman offer and strode out to meet the enemy fighter. With the remainder of both armies bearing witness, their respective champions initially clashed with spears, and neither combatant was able to score a decisive blow. Dropping their polearms after a certain amount of time had gone by, the champions clashed with sword and shield, but again neither warrior could get an edge over the other. This continued until the larger Roman duelist managed to disarm and severely wound Hormal with a series of fierce thrusts. As the hulking Roman was about to finish Hormal off, the Arab champion unsheathed his short dagger and plunged it into his unsuspecting counterpart's throat with prodigious speed. Although Hormal managed to win the duel by the skin of his teeth, he died of his wounds a few days later.
Dude, again, the Muslims remain undefeated in duels, but that one was close. Manuel might have given the best performance against the Muslims of all the Romans, which is wild to say, but I feel like he's giving the best performance against them.
Much to Amma's sorrow. This traditional single combat had given the Muslim general time to get his army back in order, and by the time Hormal had won, Amma was ready. Samé's
Again, Manuel's biggest mistake, though, despite his strong showing, was giving the Muslims time to recuperate, right? That seems to have been his undoing.
Mounted regiment even returned to the battlefield and formed up. When the whole Muslim army was ready, they charged and engaged in a grinding melee with Manuel's forces, combat which they were far better suited to. After a few hours of Roman resistance, the eunuch soldiers broke and ran, pursued and hunted all the way to Alexandria. Amma brought up a number of catapults and launched.
I was impressed by Manuel's performance there. Like, his trick with the boats, genius. him managing to actually, for a minute there, get Ammar on the ropes, incredibly well done. His biggest mistake was giving the Muslims time to recuperate. But maybe he was just being cautious. But I don't know. Either way, he put up a pretty good resistance, but at the end, Ammar once again overcomes the odds.
Launched boulders at the recalcitrant city, whose own artillerists fired back. The defences nevertheless held firm under such bombardment, until one of the gatekeepers, Ibn Basana, offered to let Ammar's troops inside if he, his family and property were retained, terms which the Muslim commander found agreeable. Therefore, at some point in the middle of 646, Alexandria's gates were opened and the Islamic army poured inside. Any Roman unit opposing the incursion was swiftly dealt with, and even those coming up to reinforce the breach were pushed away. As the rebellious city began falling victim to a sacking, the surviving imperial soldiers withdrew to their ships and sailed away. Before the vengeful Arabs could truly wreak havoc on the ancient Mediterranean metropolis and its vanquished inhabitants, an unknown Muslim approached Ammar and beseeched him to stop the violence. Although the conqueror of Egypt was by no means a merciful man by nature, his kinsman's words had such an impact that Ammar immediately ordered the cessation of hostilities. In the aftermath of the second siege of Alexandria, Ammar ripped down the walls and made the city, in his words, like the house of an adulteress, accessible from all sides. The neglect of Egypt's defense was also remedied with the new division of its Muslim garrison into 4 parts, 2 in Fustat and 1 each in Alexandria and on the northern coast, to be moved around where necessary. It would also be rotated and the troops replaced every 6 months. Not only had Ammar ibn al-As both conquered and reconquered Egypt in difficult circumstances, he had built the foundations of a rule that would secure Muslim hegemony over the fruitful country. For this, Ammar well expected to be rewarded by Uthman, but he was to be disappointed. Uthman wanted his tax fiend of a brother to occupy the plum position, but was aware that Ammar probably deserved some reward for his deeds. So, summoning the conqueror to his place of residence, Uthman inquired if he would like to remain in military command of Egypt, while Abdullah ibn Sa'd managed civilian administration. Ammar responded with the witty barb, "In that case I would be like the man holding the horns of the cow while another milks it." For the remainder of Uthman's caliphate, Ammar would bear a potent grudge and even oppose him publicly. This mutual resentment was to have serious consequences for Islamic history in the near future.
I'm gonna end the video right there. I'm looking forward to seeing what the heck Ammar does. Like, this whole thing, like I said, mentioned earlier, there are cracks starting to form within this. But I have to give it to Ammar, man. He's good at what he does. And the Romans' little attempt there to retake Egypt, like, that was an interesting episode.